Hi, I'm Sandy Lowries, and today in the Confessional I am joined by a very special guest, Chloe Higgins, who is the author of the award-winning novel The Girls, a story about death and sex and love. In 2005, Chloe's world would be forever changed. While she was at home studying for her Year 12 exams with her mum, her dad was away with her two younger sisters, Carly and Lisa, on a skiing trip. On the way home from that skiing trip, the unimaginable happened, and an extraordinary car crash saw her dad survive, but her two little sisters perish. In order to make sense of her grief, Chloe has written this raw and honest and extraordinary journey about what happened after the death of the girls. Chloe Higgins is also the director of the Wollongong Writers Festival, and I'm so honoured to have her here today. So hi, Chloe Higgins of Confessional.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
First of all, congratulations on your extraordinary book, The Girls, which is a raw and beautifully written account of a huge chapter of your life and things that progressed afterwards.
Yes, that is the world's biggest understatement. It was quite a little bit of an ordeal. Yeah. But, an interesting one, if nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. And congratulations as well on winning the Premier's Literary Award, the People's Choice Award.
Yeah, that was so amazing. I was really blown away and, just a massive boost in confidence in my work, I think. So yeah, it's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah, look, and so well deserved. Absolutely beautiful. So I guess for those who haven't read the book yet, and I encourage everyone to go and read it because it's an incredible piece of work. In your own words, how would you kind of summarise The Girls?
Yeah, I think for me it is really about trying to figure out, how do I love and support my parents and simultaneously love and support myself, really. There's a lot of kind of sex, drugs, rock and roll, grief, and all that kind of stuff in the book, starting with my two sisters passing away in a car accident in 2005 when I was 17. And obviously that is a hugely important part of the work. But I think as I started delving deeper, it was really about how do the three of us coexist with this kind of ever-present grief between us, and kind of the memories of, I guess, kind of some of the crazy things that I did off the back of Carly and Lisa dying and trying to make sense of that and, really putting my parents through a tough time. But now kind of being an adult and having quite different politics from them, different worldview, and so kind of needing to live authentically, but also kind of balance that with a deep understanding that, I'm their last remaining child and they're always going to live in fear that I'm also going to die. And so naturally for them, there's this huge fear that they live with every day, but I also need to live my life and be free and be independent and be so trying to balance those two things, I think is really what the book is exploring. Yeah.
Yeah, and so beautifully done as well, because I think that's, one of the most beautiful things I sort of took away from that was watching, through the reader's eyes, I guess, is kind of watching you as this beautiful young woman, but going through this very extraordinary and traumatic experience that never goes away, but watching you sort of throughout the book growing up and trying to be your own person. And I just loved the themes of exploring how do you cope with your parents and how do you all sort of get along. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what was the catalyst for actually writing the book? What sort of made you think about putting it down on paper and getting it out there?
Yeah, so the girls died mid-2005 and I kind of had, I think it was like a year and a half or something like that, of kind of trying to live in the way that I had lived before the accident. So, in my parents' home, and being someone I was previously, before the accident, really studious and really, I guess, well behaved, in quote marks, whatever the hell that means, right? And then kind of went off the rails and ended up in a psychiatric ward in 2007. And for me, that was such a gift. I think it was the first time where I could have a little space. You know, I needed to like not live with my parents for a while, I think, and exist in a space where it was okay for me to be less than adult in a way, and cry and almost have tantrums in a way, because I didn't really know how to express that grief. It came as such a shock. I'd really never had such extreme emotions before in my life. I'd had a pretty privileged and sheltered life before that. And so the psych ward kind of gave me space to do all of that. And one of the things that I did do with that newfound space during my time there was start writing. I'd been a reader like my whole life. You know, my parents would go to bed and I would still be reading under the covers of the flashlight and all that kind of usual book nerd growing up stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with as well. And so it kind of, it kind of made sense for me to start writing. And I was doing Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. So just journaling at the time. And I just kind of decided that I wanted to write a book about the accident. And of course I had no idea back then that was, you know, so early on, and I would have then another 12 years of going to university to learn how to write and writing fiction for a while. And, you know, that whole apprenticeship that comes with writing. It's not just as simple as like something interesting has happened, so therefore I will be an author, right? Like there's this long apprenticeship that I then went through. But I think I just knew early on, when I found writing, in quote marks, I don't know, like I was always going to write this book. Like I moved away from it for a while when I let myself believe memoir was uncool and, you know, and not, you know, and that my story wasn't political enough or serious enough or whatever. But I think I was always going to come back to it. Yeah.
And I guess that leads me to the next thing, which is, so in the writing of it, did you actually find it was, or has it been cathartic for you, or did it end up being a much harder journey than you imagined it would be?
No, I think for me, writing is such a gift and a privilege and an honor. Like, even when I'm writing about hard stuff, I feel like I'm learning about myself and about how to relate to other people and communicate more clearly, you know. So yeah, I'm not saying that it was always easy, but I'm very much in love with the process of writing just as much as the product of writing. And I'm very much in love with learning. And so, like, to have, I don't know, I just feel like it's a privilege. Yeah. And I mean, I'm also someone that really enjoys seeing my therapist, right? Because I feel like I grow, I feel like I move forward, even though it might be hard to sink into those emotions, or to then go and have to have conversations with my mother or whatever I need to do off the back of that session. I get that those things can be hard, but ultimately for me, there's a deep pleasure in knowing like this is healthy, this is moving forward, this is growing, you know? And I think writing is how I figure out those same things, you know?
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that writing, you know, for those that do write, it is such a gift. You know, whether they're published or they're not published, I think journaling is such an extraordinary force in us perhaps understanding our own feelings and sorting through the myriad of stuff that goes on in our minds.
Yeah.
That was very helpful.
Yeah. And I think it also teaches you to be kind. The way that I write anyway, I feel like I learn how to be kind through my writing as well, to myself, but also even, you know, to my mother. Like Vivian Gornick's The Situation and the Story was such a huge influence on me when I was writing this book. And she talks about, like, if you're going to point the finger outwards, you also need to point the finger inwards, right? And I mean, that's like psychology or therapy 101 that so many of us don't really know how to do. And it's like this constant process of learning how to do. And I try to do that in my everyday life, and I'm still trying to learn how to do that. But equally, I try to replicate that on the page. And so it becomes this like practice of, you know, taking ownership for my thinking and actions and communication, and using that to improve how my relationship with my parents, you know, in some way writing about it is a practice run for then living it with my parents. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've done that so beautifully, I have to say, in your book, because you haven't shied away from actually looking at yourself, and as you say, of pointing the finger inwards. And this is I suppose, what was the reaction, by the way, to before it was published, even with editors, with family, with friends who I'm not sure if they were privileged enough to read it. Obviously, the editor would have been. But what was the reaction in terms of just how honest and how raw and how beautifully exposed you are?
Yeah. So my parents were really, my parents are the two people I'm kind of think of when you ask me this question. So my dad, he wanted to read it ahead of time, and he kept like, is it ready? Is it ready? And I was like, yeah, it's almost ready. I just need to finish a few edits. Da, da, da. I was like, but Dad, I'm really scared. Like, I really, I kind of sink my teeth into both you and Mum, and I'm really nervous. And da, da. But anyway, he was really insistent. And to be honest, whenever I write about someone, I always offer them to read it before I publish it. Anyway, so I definitely felt that was way within his rights. Obviously, showed it to him, and he was like, "Oh, it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. That wasn't that bad." Like, in terms of how I like portrayed him or whatever, I think he said he was expecting something a lot worse. So, and we just had a lot of good conversations, Dad and I, about it. And he's just been really supportive. But he is naturally, like, he'll just kind of support whatever it is I want to do. And will very rarely counsel me without me first asking for advice. My mum's a little bit different. She likes to give advice way before it's asked for. But I think she also knows.
The scourge of all mothers, I think. Being a mum myself too, I sometimes find myself doing it and think, "Ooh, stop."
It's hard. I find myself doing it as well. I don't even have kids, so I can't even imagine. So she didn't really want me to publish it. I think she has a really different lens, or really different kind of way of thinking about gender, sex, sexuality. And so particularly some of the kind of work where I was writing about my kind of sexual history in the book, she was very, very nervous about coming out into public for fear of what others will think. Whereas my dad kind of doesn't really give a shit what other people think. My mum was very nervous about that, and did at one point quite overtly say that she didn't want me to publish it. And, and I ultimately felt that she had right to veto the stuff that I was writing about her, but she didn't have right to veto the stuff when I was writing about my own sexual past. Like, that I'm an adult, and that's actually my stuff to decide what to do with, who to tell, when to share, but the stuff about her, I was very willing to have dialogue about and wanted to share with her, but she said she didn't want to read it. And so it just went to publication. And now it's really funny because she reminds me, like those dance moms, that reality TV show, like Dance Moms, and the mums are like, she's like that for my book, like literally like that for my book. And she still hasn't read it, so she doesn't even know what she's championing anymore. And like a few days ago, it was like the anniversary of, I think maybe my publication date or something. I think it was like the 27th of August. And she shared on Facebook, as she does, like, she does more promo for the book than I do. And she shared it, and someone made a comment like, "I'm so glad that Chloe wrote and shared this book. Like, it's, helped so many people." And I noticed Mum commented, "I'm so glad she did as well." And I was like, oh wow, that's like a really big, I think she saw that, like, people, like, I don't know, like, for me, it was like a political act writing about my sexual history and the stuff that I shared. And I think maybe in a way that it wasn't for Mum, right? And I think now she's kind of shifted to a bit of a different place where I don't know, she's a bit more okay with it. Yeah.
And I think, I can imagine it would have been a difficult kind of journey. Like, and I don't want to give too much away. People can read your book.
Yeah.
I think that, the way that you discuss your relationship with your mum is actually quite beautiful. It resonates a lot, because I think mother-daughter relationships generally are often fraught with, this kind of different generational, different understanding. But I absolutely loved that you talk about your journey to New York with your mum. To me, that was just beautiful, because you could kind of almost see the shifting of the parent and the child. And I thought it was so beautifully written.
Thank you. That was my editor's favorite chapter, she said. Like, it was such a fun, it's a fun chapter as well, like it's serious and it's, whatever, it's a lot emotionally, but there's also a playfulness. Also stylistically, I love the kind of playfulness, with the Facebook statuses. Like, my mum is like just such a social media like lover or whatever. Like, it's just so in line with her personality to have these kind of Facebook posts threaded throughout the chapter. And then we get a sense of her kind of voice, which is also like, she's quite a funny woman. So yeah, I think you're not alone. I think definitely a few people like that. Although it was interesting when I talk about the vaginal prolapse, 3 men of all the people that read it prior to publication, there were like 3 men that told me to take it out. None of the women told me to take it out, but 3 men told me to take it out. That it like was like too private. One person said like one that it was like inappropriate.
I loved that you left it in.
So many women have written to me like, oh my God, thank you so much for writing about vaginal prolapse, like blah, blah, blah. Yeah. My mom or whatever, like, yeah.
Great. And it's not just vaginal prolapse, but it is actually that you talk about sex in a really honest way. I feel that, a lot of the writing that I have done and in a lot of the podcasts that I have done, this kind of, I recently did a podcast with a woman who's brilliant, Nikki Hine. She's Australia's first blind fashion designer. She was talking about how she had gone through 3 miscarriages, and she was talking about her cervix opening up, and then she actually stopped and said, I'm really sorry to any men who are listening to that. You're probably feeling uncomfortable. And I said to her, I think it's fantastic that you're talking about it. Just go ahead. I mean, at the end of the day, we are seeing, we do go through, changes in our body, including like, a prolapsed, uterus or whatever is going on. There's a million things that can go wrong with a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I love that and I do see it as a bit political, even in 2020, which is crazy, that it is a political stand to actually talk about our sexuality and to talk about sex.
Yeah. I think like, if like for me, like if a man wants to sleep with me, he better be sure is ready to listen to me talk about my periods. Like, they are part and parcel. It's not, you can't have one bit of my body and not the other bit, right? They're so intimately tied together. And even I kind of find it quite interesting in like spaces where there will be like sometimes more women than men and the topic comes up. Like, I think it's important to like continue with that conversation, and even not that they need to know everything or that they need to be okay. Like, like even just like, maybe they have some questions or something, maybe they haven't been invited to like get an understanding of how these things work. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's important and somewhat amusing, to be honest. Yeah.
I agree. And I think it's kind of a generational thing, which is fab. So my mum was one of the early adopters of feminism, kind of burnt her bra in the 70s in solidarity with her American sisters. And she, she was really full on about making damn sure that her daughters knew that they had choices and they could do things. And one of the things she was really big on when we were growing up was teaching us about, anatomy and real anatomy. So, she was very open. And I remember being a teenager and my friends would be around and she'd be discussing periods and boobs and things and sex. And I would be dying of embarrassment at, 14, thinking, oh my God, my mum is just so embarrassing. Really interestingly now, I've got 3 adult children, 2 sons and a daughter, and they all are very open and talk quite openly and honestly about things. And I think I'm really proud of the fact that I carried that down that line. I often, look up to the ceiling because my mum's passed away now and think, I'm really glad she gave me that kind of background and that upbringing, because it just made it so much easier to talk to my kids really openly about that.
It's so crazy to me that I have an essay coming out with the Sydney Review of Books soon. And I was dating a beautiful man for like 2.5 years or something. And I just talk about it. I was talking to my friends one day about how I would keep track in my head how long it had been since we'd had sex, and that if it had been like if we'd gone like more than, I can't remember what it was, but like a week without having sex, then I felt like I had an obligation to put out. But if we'd like had sex, in quote marks, put out, if we'd had sex the night before, then I felt like it was permissible for me to go back to sleep, right, and not have sex if I didn't feel like it. And now this relationship that I'm talking about was like 3 years ago, right? So this is like a relatively recent, I'm 32 now. This is not me as a young girl. This is me as a fully formed adult, not realizing what I was thinking. And there was no pressure from my, at the time, partner whatsoever, right? None of this was coming from him. There was never any expectation. It was all internal. And when I mentioned this to my friends, I just kind of casually mentioned it and without realizing that it was a thing. And one of my friends pulled me up, was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, what? Wait, what? And I was, oh, that's not normal. And they were like, no, that's not normal, Chloe. I was like,
it's not. But in the discussion of that, how fantastic, because look at the learnings that come out of it, right? And and in writing an essay, and I would really love to read that essay. I think that, by writing an essay about that, I guarantee you'll be inundated with other women your age, younger, or even older, who actually go, oh, actually I do that too, or I've done that, or isn't that the right thing to do?
Yes. So like, I didn't even know that I could talk to my partner about sex literally until like 2 years ago. Like I didn't even learn until I was like 29 or 30 years old, that I then posted this thing about that on Facebook and started getting people like commenting on this thing. And they were like, why didn't you ever talk about it? And I was like, with my partner. And they're like, yeah. I was like, I don't know. That just felt so insurmountable to me. It didn't feel like something that I could bring up with him at all. And then he was like, he saw it and he's like, of course we could have spoken about that. Like, of course I want to talk about that with you. And I just didn't know it. I honestly didn't know it.
Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating thing. And I'm 51, so much older than you, but it's, when I got divorced at like 41, and I had been in a long-term relationship marriage for a very long time and started blogging about sex, dating and relationships. Our mutual contact and friend, Carly Finlay, likes to joke that I'm a sex writer, a sex blogger. And because I was so honest about it and really open about it and in my sexuality, but also talking about like dating guys, and then, would I have sex on the first date or third date, or what are these rules and how come there are rules, and all of this kind of stuff. But women my age would step forward and actually say, wow, I actually didn't know anybody felt that way, or I didn't know anybody else was feeling like that. I didn't know that we could talk about sex. I'm embarrassed to talk about it with my partner, or I'm even embarrassed to talk about it with my girlfriends.
Yeah.
I sort of grew up with this really cool group of girls, and we all grew up together from when we were like young teenagers. So there's nothing off limits. So we talk about sex, periods, discharge, whatever may be going on.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. It's a great way to be, I've walked into girlfriends' houses and they go, hang on, I've got to whip my bra off. Can you look at this? Is this right? Whatever, right? So I feel really blessed and lucky to have that. But I know a lot of women just don't have that, and they don't have this understanding that it's actually okay to talk about it.
Yep.
So I loved that you wrote about it in the book. I thought it was, I really loved that you spoke about this in the book. And this kind of really interesting thing about, I guess, for you processing too, that in talking about sex and in talking about your past and how you used sex in a way to kind of just try and live within the grief was a really fascinating journey, I think.
Yeah. Wait till the manuscript I'm working on now, I'm about 4 years in. So probably another 2 years off kind of sending it to my editor. But it's really, because in the girls, all this kind of stuff that we're talking about was really just in a chapter or two, maybe 2 chapters. But, the girls is mainly about my parents, but now, and grief and whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of asking similar questions, but really zooming in on that kind of sexual, romantic kind of area for the second book. So
Sure.
I'm excited.
I'm excited. I can't wait. And I think it's really nice that you touched on, romance as well, because it's really interesting our views as women on what romance is meant to be. I recently had Stephanie Wood
Yeah.
on the podcast. It hasn't even been released yet. And she was talking about writing Fake, her book Fake, and about exactly that, about this kind of, fantasized fantasized kind of version we have as young girls growing up. What does love look like, and why we should all fall so romantically in love with some Prince Charming. It was actually quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm keen to listen to that. I loved her book. I'm keen to listen.
Book.
Yeah.
And speaking about books, you're also the director of the Wollongong Writers Festival, which is, congratulations, it's a massive feather in your cap. So how did all of that come about? How did Wollongong Writers Festival come about?
I was a third-year undergrad student at Wollongong Uni, and I just love literary events, but not such a big fan of having to go to Sydney for them all the time. And so just got some mates together and we just started it. Yeah. And then it just kind of grew, obviously with a lot of hard work, but a lot of hard work. But yeah, now it's like a fully, not for state funded, not for profit. We work with about 60 artists per year over 35 events. So we're going online this year, obviously. It's the last weekend of November. It's just kind of grown up with me in a way, from like student writer into whatever I am now. Still a student writer, but with a little bit more experience under my belt, I guess. So yeah, it's really cool. Yeah,
that is fantastic. You get cooler by the minute. I love that. We just started it.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to bloody go to Sydney all the time. It's so annoying. Why can't we have events here? So,
but it's true, right? And we're all sort of missing out on Melbourne Writers Festival. We're missing out on all this, but things are online, but it's not as it was. So how has COVID kind of impacted on the Wollongong Writers Festival? What sort of is going to be different this year?
Yeah, we're going online. Obviously, the program has shrunk a little bit, but it's still. I think we've still got 12 or 13 events. So actually I just sent the program off to the designer yesterday. And it's just all going online. So obviously the biggest difference is that the community won't be able to gather in person. So that will be a shame. The upside though is that we've been able to Skype some international artists in, because it is all on Zoom anyway. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting and really exciting, and something that I've been actually wanting to do for a while, but didn't kind of have the resources or whatever to do. COVID has kind of made a bit more easier, really. So that's probably the main difference. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And are you going to drop any confessions in here? Are we allowed to know who your headliners are? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I don't have a problem, but I think my communications manager would shoot me. I'm like, let's just tell whatever. What does it matter? She's like, no, I need something for the press release.
Well, people will just have to follow along then, won't they? So they know who's coming to Wollongong Writers Festival. Right?
Yeah, we do have some really big names, a couple of really big names this year. So as always, and a lot of incredible writers. So I think it'll be a good show. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I was going to ask you, so what's been the reaction to the girls since publication? Because I know we were chatting about beforehand and people had maybe suggested you write under a pseudonym. Aren't you glad you didn't? But what's been the big win since it was published? I mean, clearly it's an award-winning book and deservedly so, but were you surprised by the reactions?
Yeah, I've been surprised within my family by who, you have in your head people that are going to judge you, people that are going to be supportive of you, and what you imagine is just never quite what reality turns out to be. And that's been a really beautiful experience, actually, just seeing how supportive everyone in my family has been. Like, there's just been, from my immediate family, no backlash. in some of the more distant family, I think there was some comments going, a little bit of, you know, derogatory commentary going around for a while. And my aunt, who I was actually very afraid of in terms of what she was going to think of the work, particularly the sexuality stuff, was like the one that kind of nipped those, you know, nipped that gossiping in the back and just addressed them and stood up for me. And I was just like, what? Oh my God, you're the coolest. Like, so yeah. And then, yeah, the kind of award, you know, the National Biography Award shortlisting, and then the VPLA People's Choice Award, you know, and getting invited to Byron Bay Writers Festival. Yeah, that's been, I think really important, just to even reassure me that the work that I'm doing does matter, that it is resonating with people. And then just getting a lot of like DMs on Instagram or Facebook from random strangers telling me about how the book has helped them, particularly kind of around introversion, extroversion stuff with mother-daughter dynamics has been really interesting. So yeah, just really lovely. Yeah.
That's so great. And look, you know, I've spoken to a number of people who have read it and all loved it. And it's interesting the different things they take from it. Some who have personal journeys in terms of grief, and others who don't, but they do, it resonates with them in terms of, or how would I feel, or what would I do, but definitely the mother-daughter relationship is kind of this really lovely stream that travels through, and I think resonates for a lot of people as well. But I imagine this would have been such a helpful book to others who have found themselves with grief, because as we know, grief doesn't ever go away, and it's kind of a learning of how do we manage grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And so has it made the journey for you, is it easier for you now to talk about like Carly and Lisa, and to talk about your sisters more openly? Is it easier, or does it ever get easier?
No, I think it's funny you asked, because last night we had like with my cousins and grandparents and parents and stuff, like a little early Father's Day dinner thing, and Carly and Lisa came up, which is quite unusual. And we were just kind of chatting briefly about, Carly had a habit of just like wanting to eat butter, like just straight out of the thing, like it was like Nutella or something, you know. And that was really nice. I remember thinking like, this is a little bit different. Like, I feel like something's shifted here. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. So I was asking, since the book's been published, is it easier, do you think, for other people? Do they feel that they can come forward and talk about, you know, your sisters, and talk more openly about their experiences?
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know that it's like this black and white, you know, fixed thing, but I definitely get in the messages from people the sense that it's helped open dialogue, you know, even what we were talking about before with that kind of sexuality stuff, like not even realizing that you aren't the only one that has these feelings or thoughts, and then realizing that you can even express them. And I think that it's made people feel like a little bit normalized and validated, and and maybe saw them start to kind of open locations. Yeah, definitely.
Which is really nice. I think I have a very close friend who lost a brother in a very, very traumatic way. And I think what's interesting is over the years, she had sort of mentioned it, other people feel it's difficult to talk about her brother or to share their memories of him, because maybe for fear of upsetting the family, or people, you know, I think a lot of people really fear grief.
Oh, I think it's huge. I think that's so normal. I feel like I've seen so many situations where people just say nothing because they don't know what to say. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to make people uncomfortable, or this idea that like crying is a bad thing. Like if you know, the collective I make you, the collective you cry, it means I'm a bad person. Like, no, it doesn't. Like, it's fine to cry. Like, that's cool. And my dad's quite interesting in that sense. He'll just like sometimes like, I don't know, just be at a wedding and he'll just be crying because he was just thinking it, and he'll just like tell you about it, but he's just sitting there crying. I mean, obviously he's not feeling great, but he's also not really ashamed about needing to cry sometimes, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
But I love that. Actually, you're writing about you in the book because we've talked about your mum, but I think there are some really beautiful moments in there that you've shared about your dad as well. And that's one of the things that comes across, is that he is very open about his feelings.
Oh yeah, they're just like on the surface, like literally you can just see them. Like I can, yeah, yeah, they're so visible and they're always present, which is, yeah, quite a different way of inhabiting a male identity or body, right? Like he's and I think actually quite an important way, you know, like I think it's important for men to be able to cry and express themselves. And yeah, there's no shortage of that. Like when he's working from home at the moment, like just listening to Celine Dion while he works, like, you know, he'll just be like crying while he's like watching a film at night. Like that's just, you know, he'll like go buy me tampons or something from the shops sometimes if I need or whatever. I mean, not really now, but you know, when I was younger, like, yeah, that's just normal for him. Yeah.
But I love that. And I think it comes across as being very normal in your book, which I love. I really loved that. So, you know, my boys are really open with emotion. Again, you know, I suppose thanks, Mum, for the way she raised me and for the way I've raised my sons. But I think that's kind of a really, you're right. You know, it should be more normalised, that it's okay for men, and especially, you know, given the extraordinary circumstances of your family and what you've lived through together and apart, you know, separately. I think it is such a healthy way to live one's life, is to kind of just go, well, this is how I feel. I can't swallow it. I can't pretend it's not happening. This is it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And you can see this kind of very beautiful relationship you have with both of your parents, but you know, you could see that kind of I don't want to say reverence, but I could see how much you admired your dad.
Oh, good. I'm glad. My mum always, because she hasn't read the book, she's like, you know, oh, Chloe, all these people probably think I'm like a terrible mother. I can imagine they only hear your side of the story. I'm like, no, I mean, I hope it would never be my hope that I would only portray something that's going to benefit me, or, you know, like that's really not, I'm trying to move towards understanding her more, you know, even though I don't always behave well and I sometimes get frustrated or I do still sometimes snap at her. That doesn't mean that, like, you know, that's my failure, right? That's not, you know, that's not on her. And I would never want to portray our relationship as being on her failure, because it's not, you know, obviously. Yeah.
Oh no, and that definitely comes across. So I think that the reason people say this is so honest and so raw is exactly that, right? Because you have explored you and your reactions to other people in the book. So I think it's so done, and I think it's quite a cathartic. When my mother passed away, and my mother and I would often butt heads, and believe me, it wasn't always her fault. In the writing about my mother after she passed away was really extraordinary, because it's like, you know, and it's easy to romanticize people, and I get that, and so you kind of, but in the looking at my mum and really exploring that, I had to really, really face some things about myself as well, and the things that I never wanted. I never want to be like her, and then I realised there is so much about me that is quite like her.
Yeah.
And to just kind of recognise too where she grew up, how her life was so different from mine growing up, and how, you know, our life experiences shape exactly who we are. We are the sum total of our experiences, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I was reading your book and kind of having a chuckle to myself about, I never got to New York with Mum, but I did, you know, we did this trip to Thailand. She was a proud disabled woman, but, you know, and I was thinking back to me lugging like her wheelchair in and out of taxis in Thailand and doing things, and her, you know, the things that she would complain about. And I look back now, and it just, though, that was so beautiful, that story in the book, because that chapter in the book, because it did just make me laugh.
So funny
as well. And I remember saying to Mum, just go off and do something by yourself. Like, why do you?
Yeah.
I loved that. But I love that your mum did as well go off and do many things by herself.
She did indeed. Yeah, she's gunning for another trip back now. So,
Oh, is she?
yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
And also too, I was thinking, and you said it so beautifully before, but that your parents would have always worried so much about you for very obvious reasons, and that you spent so much time away traveling, which is kind of gutsy and ballsy, and would have been quite difficult for them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I travel for 3 months every year, and I have done since I was 18. I think every year bar one, and obviously maybe this year now as well. But yeah, I think it is, and it has been extremely hard for them. But also, I can't just not travel because of that reason, right? Like, that's not healthy either. Yeah, I think my mother's had many a sleepless nights, probably 3 months of them straight every year since I was 18. Yeah.
They must love when you get home, it's like, oh, sleep.
I think she has made jokes about that before. It's like she goes 3 months without sleep every year, and then that first night that I'm back, she just sleeps like so good. Yeah. Yeah.
The question I really want to ask you too is, for anyone who's contemplating writing a memoir, because there's people out there all the time thinking, oh, I will, but they're terrified of upsetting their family, or they're terrified of talking about truths, or they're terrified of maybe exploring themselves. What's the best advice you could give for anyone who's thinking about writing a memoir?
Yeah, I actually mentor a bunch of students now. We have like I have these little groups where I work with like 4 students, and we workshop their work over 3 months together. And this is actually a really common thing that comes up. And I just feel like often people are asking that question way, 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 way too early. Like, that is a very valid and important question, but it's a question for really down the track, because you don't know how people are going to react. So I think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt and the freedom to react how they will react. Obviously, I think that you need to show people what you write about them before publication, but ultimately you don't know how they're going to respond to that. But probably more importantly, like, you don't know in a first draft what you're writing about, right? The first draft is even just figuring out what is the central inquiry of the work. And so letting those kinds of questions control those early drafts just make no sense to me, because the work is likely to shift and change so much from your original vision of it, that you're just shooting yourself in the foot, I think, by asking those questions too early. Yeah.
I think that's great advice. And for any writers who are tuning in and listening today to this, or listening to this when it comes out, like, you're quite a disciplined writer. I read that in the book. So do you always make sure that you set X amount of hours aside per day, and is that how you write?
Yeah, I do. I have kind of a pretty strict routine. I believe some people would call it a little bit OCD, but anyway, it is what it is. It works for me. I kind of write usually kind of for 2 hours of writing first thing. I mean, it really changes around depending on what else is going on, but generally we'll write for about an hour each day, and then read for 2 hours a day. And I try to kind of do that first thing. I'm always right first thing in the morning. That's like a given. As soon as I get up, 6 a.m. usually, grab a coffee and a banana, do a quick pee, and I'm straight to my desk. I don't check email. I'm not open to conversation. If someone tries to make conversation, I'm pretty damn rude to them, to be honest. I don't leave my house, and just get that day's writing work done. And then the reading is a bit more flexible in terms of when it happens, but it's generally for about 2 hours a day. And I try to stick to that no matter where I am in the world, no matter what's going on.
I think it's
5 days a week.
Well done you.
Yeah.
Well done you. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your book, and for being so bloody honest about your experiences and your life. Because I think that's one of the most beautiful pieces, of things about your work, is exactly that.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks so much.
And I look forward to the new book whenever it comes out. Very excited.
Oh my God. Yes. Yeah, and I have an Instagram account if people want to stay in touch or see what I'm doing. It's just Chloe Marie Higgins, so ChloeMarieHiggins. They can check me out on Instagram, and I'm often posting little questions and writing stuff. And
great.
Keen to hear from people.
Those links, and I will be sharing links to the Wollongong Writers Festival as well.
Amazing.
And looking forward to following that this year. That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
And I will put up links to where people can actually purchase your amazing book, The Girls, and I hope everybody rushes out and reads it if they haven't already.
Me too. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your quality podcasts. We chat to really interesting women telling their amazing stories, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for all of your support. Bye for now.